A magical forest inhabited by fairies may not be the fairy tale place we have heard in legends. Sweet fairies are not friendly creatures at all. Years of imprisonment underground have turned them into vicious creatures who spend hours at night watching humans, admiring their bodies, gestures, facial expressions, perfect form. But what caused the fall of an entire civilization as old as life itself? How did humans manage to drive the fairies from the surface of the earth? And why did they become hostages to their own rules? The image of the bystanders gives us part of the answers, but most of the action takes place behind the scenes. This is normal for this kind of movie genre. If, like me, you want to know the whole story of the fairies and create the integrity of the picture in your head, then I suggest you watch this video to the end. So I think we should start with the story of the friendship between humans and fairies, or as they are called, the people of the fairies. We do not know exactly when this union began, but humans and fairies lived in harmony for a long time. Humanity existed and prospered thanks to the forest creatures. Fairies could cure all diseases, heal, give the right advice, cause rain, calm storms, contribute to the increase of crops, plant seeds that immediately grew on their soil. They were gods to humans. In return, humans taught them crafts, construction, and took care of their gods. At that time, the fairies lived under the cover of the forest, in the shade of giant trees. Sunlight did not kill them, it only made them uncomfortable. Their skin dried quickly, and direct rays caused burning and left burns. But because they were in the shade, they were completely safe. Anyone could turn to the fairies for help, and the forest dwellers always helped their brothers. Thus, humans in alliance with the fairies knew nothing of hunger and disease. But humans were greedy, selfish, and always envied their gods. Fairies, on the other hand, did not experience human vices. They did not care about wealth and power. The ways of nature were enough for them to live peacefully. In time, the Celtic people demanded power from the fairies. The winged gods could not refuse their brothers, so they began to teach magic to humans. This is how sorcerers, witches, and druids came into being. Man was given the power that belonged to the gods. This was the first mistake. The second mistake was knowledge. The fairies revealed all the secrets of their symbols and explained the meanings of the runes to the people. Each symbol could give a man what he wanted, give prosperity, happiness, health. Some gave fertility to the land, other runes opened new frontiers of knowledge. The humans no longer needed the forest dwellers, but that wasn't the reason for the war. After hundreds of years of prosperity, a Celtic king hosted one of the fairies. Their intimacy resulted in the birth of a half-blood child. This was the first step to war. The thing is, the fairies admired human bodies. They were symmetrical, always the right shape. Fairies, on the other hand, were the opposite. Their appearance was often ugly. Some had only one nostril or eye. Others had no nose at all. Others had fangs protruding from their mouths. 4 had webbed feet and hands, long skinny limbs, bones protruding in all directions, skin so transparent in places you could see the ribs through it. 5ths had breasts so long they had to be thrown behind their backs. That's why fairies like to copy humans. They even went so far as to wear clothes that covered the flaws in their bodies. The hair on fairies' heads grew in clumps, and the back of their heads was always bald. That's why they wore hats. Fairies did not envy humans because they were incapable of feeling envy. Winged humans admired them, but the first half humans changed everything. Half human, half fairy, they took the best of each. As fairies, they could fly, were immortal, strong, and could reincarnate as humans so that no one could tell the difference between a fairy and a human. Sunlight no longer caused them pain. Even silver didn't burn their bodies. A perfect species, but the half-breeds also took on all the inherent vices of humans. Hate, love, anger, feelings the fairies were unfamiliar with. The half-breed children were raised by fairies, but they were unable to give them love. They watched how humans lived, how they loved their children, and they envied them. This envy played a role in the future war. The half-bloods began to kill and imitate children. They infiltrated human families under the guise of sons and daughters. Such fairies were called changelings, and their reincarnation was perfect. No one could tell the difference between the original and the copy. Half-breeds became a danger to humanity. They could copy courtiers, generals, kings, and queens. So the Celtic lord decided to get rid of the fairies. While it was still in his power, sorcerers and druids persuaded the half-breeds to betray the fairies. In return, they promised them freedom and riches. At the edge of the forest, the humans dug a grave into the ground. They didn't know how to kill the fairies, but they did know how to take their freedom. Early in the morning, when the sun appeared on the horizon, the humans set fire to the forest. The fairies did not know what to do. The druids' magic fire could not be extinguished by rain. Huge trees burned like splinters. The speed of the fire was as fast as the wind. Then the half-elves did their part. They carried the fairies to safety, a huge pit. The fairies were gullible, and there was no way out. When all the winged creatures had crawled into the pit, the humans sealed the exit with a huge stone door. The wizards sealed the tomb and cursed the fairies. Everyone outside, mostly half-breeds, the humans began to kill. Yes, half-breeds are immortal. They can't die of old age, but arrows and swords can tear their flesh. They are just as vulnerable as humans, so some of the changelings had to flee and hide. It was unknown how many there were or how long the fairies had lived underground, but after years of imprisonment, they managed to dig their way to the surface. When the fairies emerged, they found that they had lost their wings, all their magical abilities, and the sunlight was burning their bodies. They could no longer hide in the shade of the trees as they had before. The pit and the catacombs became their home, and the cursed forest gave them no way out. The mighty gods turned into beasts, creatures that could only kill and dream of a place. This is the general and basic story of the war between fairies and humans, on which one of the plot lines of the movie Watchers is based. The second plot line, of course, has to do with Professor Rourke Martin. We know almost nothing about how he managed to build a bunker, find a way out of the forest, capture and train the half-breed Ayn Rockton. So I suggest you get to know the professor's story. It will reveal many secrets. I will not tell you the whole biography of Kilmartin, only the facts that are related to the movie. The professor has long been fascinated by Irish folklore. He often studied stories about the forests where leprechauns, banshees, and fairies lived. One day, he came across a document that described strange events that occurred in the 13th century. These were entries in Smith's diary about the arrival of the Norman army, which invaded Ireland in the early 13th century. Their scouting party went into the woods where the locals said darkness lurked. No one went into the forest because to do so meant certain death. A detachment of 100 soldiers was supposed to check the forest and clear it of partisans, but in the morning only 9 soldiers returned. They claimed that when night fell, their horses began to run in fear. The ground shook and creatures appeared in the shadows of the forest. The soldiers fought with them, but the evil things could not be defeated. Then one of the soldiers and his friends began to run under the hooks of the men. He ran for what seemed like an eternity, but the forest did not end until his feet plunged into the water. It turned out to be a river. They took off all their armor and threw themselves into the water. The soldiers managed to escape. All his friends were executed for cowardice. He told this story to the blacksmith, who wrote it all down in his diary. Kilmartin was greatly inspired by this story, and he began to study everything about the mysterious forest. Later, he found older manuscripts that described the war between fairies and humans. There, he learned about shifters and half-breeds. The documents dated back to the 5th and 6th centuries. The manuscripts said that the wizard Merlin came to the settlement near the forest at the king's request. He created a protective circle at the edge of the forest that could only be opened with a runic key. As a result, the inhabitants could not enter the forest where the fairies lived. This runic password was written in a manuscript, so Kilmartin had the key, and he already had the approximate coordinates of the mysterious forest. In the movie, we were also shown these ancient runes. When the mind drove to the edge of the forest, his phone broke. On the screen of the phone, you can see the same rune key. Later, the runes appear on the stereo. Apparently, communication devices and radios can pick up the magical signal and display the runes on their screens. Most likely, after hundreds of years, the defenses weakened and people began to enter the forest, especially those who were desperate. It wasn't an isolated case. A booth with announcements was shown at the roadside. It was mostly filled with unfortunate people who had fallen victim to the ancient war, and it is not for nothing that this forest is called the Suicide Forest. Back to the professor and his scientific expedition. After the death of his wife Madeline, he had an idea to bring back a loved one. You could say he went mad. Kilmartin prepared a project, the construction of a bunker with an observation room. Everything was to be built quickly, like a great builder. The professor thought that the hardest part would be finding workers, but on the first day of the announcement, more than 20 people came to him, all because the professor promised high wages. He knew he wouldn't have to pay them anyway. The construction process itself is not mentioned anywhere, neither in the novel nor in the screenplay. Only in short videos do do we learn that it took a long time and that each time Kilmartin left the workers outside for the night and hid in the bunker. But it's not entirely clear what he did before the bunker was built. Perhaps the professor left the workers, gave instructions, and left himself by boat on the river before daylight. This could only have happened in the summer when daylight allowed him to leave the forest. There was another curiosity. Kilmartin noticed that the fairies left nothing of the workers at the construction site. There were no bones, no clothes, no personal belongings. But as he walked through the forest, he later found a treasure trove of silver jewelry. The silver burned the fairy's skin, but someone had taken the rings, necklaces, bracelets, and pendants to the edge of the forest. At the places where the jewelry was found, he put up signs naming each point of no return. He took all the silver to the bunker for later use. The professor also set up 9 cameras in the forest to watch the fairies. He hid them carefully, but it didn't work. At night, the fairies found the cameras, even the ones that were very well hidden in tree hollows, piles of leaves. He couldn't figure out exactly how they managed to find them, but later, while installing another camera, he noticed a raven watching him. He quickly realized that the fairies controlled the birds. They couldn't leave the cave during the day, but they used the ravens, controlled them to see and watch the professor during the day. As soon as night came, the control was broken and the birds immediately left the forest. All the animals did not live in the area where the fairies lived. They avoided the place, sensing danger. But the crows were puppets. Every morning they came back again and again, as if they were doing it against their will. That's how the fairies became aware of Kilmartin's actions during the day. When the sun went down, he would turn on the television with a recording of the show Lair of Love. The fairies gathered every night by the great glass wall. They couldn't tear themselves away from the TV, studying people, trying to copy their bodies, always imitating and mimicking the behavior of the show's participants, but always making mistakes, wrong eye placement, proportions, and number of fingers. That's why when Mina went down the hole, we see that the fairy has 6 fingers. She did not get the proportions right. They all make mistakes, but they learn quickly. Over time, the professor's observations and research reached a dead end, but a miracle happened. One day, he noticed a red-haired girl walking in the forest during the day. This shifter was different from the others. She was not aggressive and moved quietly during the day. The sunlight didn't hurt her. This was the Killmarker's chance. He had found the half-breed. She wandered through the forest, studying nature, collecting pebbles and acorns. Then the professor decided to try an experiment. He left a silver pendant by the observation room. The girl came in the afternoon and immediately took the gift. The silver did not burn her body, and on the fairy's face he saw joy. Kilmarker quickly realized that she was the one who had left the silver jewelry at the edge of the forest. Most likely she had been forbidden by the fairies to bring silver into her lair, for the metal was not tolerated by the fairies, so she hid it where the fairies wouldn't go. Then he decided to go further. The professor came up with a plan to lure the girl into a bunker where a trap, a steel cage, had been built. He scattered all the silver in the forest. In the afternoon, the girl came as usual and began to collect all the jewelry. She walked along the necklace, rejoicing at each find. She didn't even notice how she fell for the professor's trick, down to the bunker and into the cage. That's how Kilmartin was able to catch the fairy. Even in the movie, we can see that Madeline still loves silver jewelry. She has a ring, bracelets, necklaces, and pendants on each of her fingers. All these things belong to the workers who were killed by the fairies. The process of Madeline's training itself is not described anywhere. We don't know what happened, but apparently the professor was able to reveal some human traits in Madeline. As a half-breed, she perfectly copied the professor's wife from a photograph. In this image, his love for her was awakened, and he was able to talk to the fairy for a long time. A partial trust had developed between them. How Madeline lived after Kilmartin's death, we can only guess. What is clear is that she didn't kill anymore. She took in all the people who fell into the forest. You could say she rescued them, made the rules, and helped them in any way she could. Of course, she kept her secret. At Point of No Return 134, we can see the professor's skeleton and skull, but it was Madeline who created this scarecrow in the form of a fairy. Maybe she even missed Kilmartin. He showed her another life. Of course, these stories give us a lot of answers, but some small details are still well described in the novel. For example, how people survived, where they got water, and what they ate besides crows. In fact, there was a spring not far from the dwelling, a stream that never dried up. Water was plentiful. Madeline was also good with mushrooms, and the forest was covered with all kinds of mushrooms, as well as many nuts and other fruits. Ravens were often caught in traps. Sometimes the birds were in such a hurry to leave the forest after sunset that they crashed into the trees and fell. And in the morning, the prisoners of the forest would collect the dead crows. The only thing people feared, except for the fairies themselves of course, was the cold. The coming of winter was always bad. Constant rain and snow made the wood supply damp, and fires were hard to make. Also, as the mine descended into the cave, we can see ancient Celtic symbols on the walls. The first labyrinth of mana symbolizes the path that leads to the depths of your spirit. At the top right is the Tree of Life, symbolizing the center of the universe. When a Celtic tribe cleared the land for a future settlement, they necessarily left a large tree, the Tree of Life, in the center. It symbolized the integrity and security of the tribe. There are also agamas, which is Celtic writing. Above the inscription Earth, on the sides you can see runes. The first Fehu means wealth, abundance, material prosperity, the beginning of something new. Just below the runes, considered the executor of wishes, because it contains the potential power of realization. Other runes are luck, harmony of the home, family, and prosperity. To the left is another rune. This one is Ingus, turned off for increasing fertility, attracting positive energy in life, especially in the life of humans, but not fairies. In the middle is the Triskelion, 3 intertwined spirals symbolizing the movement of the sun, endless development, support for the forces of nature. Other inscriptions and symbols I could not decipher. I include the inscription on the circumference of the huge stone door. If there are experts among you, I would like to know what it says. Post your version in the comments. Scandinavian runes are found in both the show and the movie. The monsters only come out to hunt at night. The general setting is a forest. People try to survive. Well, of course the crows, they are one of the main components of the series from, but here in the movie The Guardians, we learned exactly what they are used for and how the fairies use them. Most likely such coincidences are coincidences, since both projects use Scandinavian myths and folklore. But I began to think that the monsters in the TV series outside might also be copying the people they killed. Maybe they're fairies too, the tooth fairies. Remember that smiley thing? They found the tooth of the grandmother he killed on the bus in his personal effects. Anyway, I liked the Observer's painting. Well, that's all for today. Don't forget to like, write comments, and see you soon.